Good evening, everybody. Today we're going to continue where we left off with the story of Heraclius. At the end of the last video, we left off with Heraclius the Younger having seized the throne in Constantinople, having overthrown Phocas, and now ruling as the emperor of the Roman Empire. Now, when Heraclius first took the throne, the first couple things he did was to remove all the vestiges of the Phocas administration, with one of the exceptions to this rule was the Patriarch of Constantinople by the name of Sergius. He developed a close relationship with Sergius that will come up from time to time as we continue on here. After taking the throne, he married his fiancée, Fabia, and she was given the name Eudokia, which is what we will refer to her from now on. When Heraclius took the throne, what he expected was that he would be able to bring an end to the conflict with Persia due to the fact that their casus belli had been removed. Just to reiterate, Maurice had been murdered and Khosrow took it upon himself to claim that he was invading the Roman Empire to avenge Maurice's death. He also claimed to have the surviving son of Maurice, Theodosius, with him in his court and was making it his mission to put Theodosius on the throne. The reign of Heraclius did not get off to the greatest of starts. Over the course of the next 2 years, he would have 2 children with Eudokia. The first would be Epiphania, and the second was named after him, Heraclius Constantine. Sadly, early into Heraclius's reign, Eudokia died of an epileptic seizure. This may have had a devastating effect on Heraclius's psyche, also combined with the fact that Khosrow had sent emissaries back to the Roman Empire stating that he was not interested in peace and he would keep fighting until all of Rome belonged to him. At the same time, the Avars, whom I mentioned in the previous video, were starting to really push past the Danube and really infest the Balkans. Consider Heraclius' position. His wife of only 2 or 3 years died, leaving him with 2 children, and his empire besieged on 2 fronts. He did attempt some form of response to the Persian invasion. The Persian invasions had pushed as far as Chalcedon, which was just right across the Bosporus from Constantinople itself. At times during this war, Roman citizens living in Constantinople could see Persian fires just across the sea. Heraclius also had internal problems with his reign, one of which stems from a former associate of his father's by the name of Priscus. Legends state that he actually sent a letter to Heraclius the Elder that was asking him to launch a revolt. There's no real corroboration for this, but it is in some of the records. One of the first things Heraclius did do was he did try to counter the Persian threat. He sent Priscus to the east to a city called Caesarea to trap the Persian general Shahin's army, which he did. However, Shahin's army was able to stage a dramatic escape. But during the siege of Caesarea, Heraclius paid a visit to Priscus, where Priscus pretended to be sick. A few months later, Heraclius took revenge on Priscus by humiliating him in front of the Senate and having him tonsured, which means to have your head shaved and you're forced to become a member of the clergy. So Heraclius did have some internal dissent, but luckily nothing really much came of it until about the 630s AD. Right now we're still in about the year 612, 613. During this time is when Eudokia died. Now, Eudokia was a loved empress. To give an idea of how loved she was, there is a story recounted in the short history regarding her funeral where during the procession a slave girl spit out the window and it landed on Eudokia's corpse. It was a purely freak accident, but the citizens of Constantinople went and grabbed the slave, pulled her to the street, and pulled her apart. They absolutely destroyed her. It was sometime before or after her death. The timelines don't exactly line up between the records, where Heraclius did attempt a military response against the Persians. He led a campaign against them with his cousin Nicetas, the same one who had seized Egypt, and they met Sharbaraz at Antioch. And this battle is really only mentioned in the history according to Sebios. Antioch is vaguely mentioned in the other sources, but according to Sebios, Heraclius' army was completely destroyed. It crippled Rome Roman military response for years to come. The major defeat at Antioch and the death of Eudokia occurred roughly around the same time. I can't imagine what Heraclius, how he must have been feeling at this time. Heraclius' army is destroyed, his family is in shambles, the empire is besieged on all fronts. And at this point, he makes one of the most controversial decisions in Roman history. When he had taken the throne, his family came to live in Constantinople, including his niece Martina. Shortly after Eudokia's death, he married his niece Martina. I believe she was in her late teens, early 20s at the time, and Heraclius at this point is maybe mid to late 30s. A lot of people think that in the ancient world, a lot of times when I tell people about this particular union, the first response I usually hear is, oh, but that's the old world. People were okay with that kind of thing back then. No, they were not. This was easily one of the most controversial, I don't think there's a word in the English language to sum up how angry and disgusted the Romans were at Heraclius' decision. And also, at this point, the Byzantine Empire did not make the Bible its law in the sense that we would think of like Sharia law, but it did draw heavily from it. Like I said, the people were absolutely disgusted. There are Bible verses, I believe, in either Leviticus or Deuteronomy that talk about relationships that are forbidden, and an uncle / niece or aunt and nephew marriages are completely forbidden. Now, why did he do it? This question is postulated by Walter Cagey in his book Heraclius, this book right here, which I actually used as a secondary source in conjunction with the primary sources that I used. Walter Cagey says something along the lines of Heraclius must have felt that family were the only ones he could trust, which back in those times, in a position as volatile as Emperor of the Roman Empire, it kind of makes sense. But interestingly, Heraclius stayed married to Martina for the rest of his life. He turned down chances to divorce her. He refused to divorce her, even when the Patriarch Sergios of Constantinople urged him to. Now, at this point, things were getting really bad for Heraclius in Constantinople. Now we had the very people that he ruled telling him how wrong he was, how he himself had brought God's wrath upon them. There are coins from this era that actually have the inscription reading Deus adjuta Romanes, which means, may God help the Romans. So the situation was just getting worse and worse and worse. Persian raids, like I had mentioned earlier, where they were raiding Chalcedon, now they were flat out sieging Chalcedon. At the same time, the Avars are sweeping in from the Balkans. This hasn't stopped, by the way. This has been going on for years, but their raids are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Heraclius is desperately trying to figure out what to do. He sends emissaries to Khosrow again and again and again. He sends several diplomatic missions to Khosrow. Interestingly enough, one of these diplomatic missions he sent to Khosrow was actually suggested by the Persian general Shahin, who requested an audience with him. Shahin, this is in all the historical sources, Shahin said to Heraclius, try to make peace with us. So Heraclius thought it was in the bag. He had one of his arch enemies saying, hey, let's end this. Khosrow said no. Amid the controversy of Heraclius marrying his niece, one of the worst possible calamities for a Christian empire occurred. The Persian general Sharbaraz made an alliance with the Jewish residents of Jerusalem. He incited them to revolt. To make a very long, complicated story short, the Persians took Jerusalem. With the capture of Jerusalem, Sharbaraz was able to secure the one true cross, the very same that Jesus Christ himself was crucified on, and have it sent back to Persia. Diplomatic relations that have survived in the historical record read, Khosrow intends to conquer all of Rome. I will have no mercy on you until you renounce he who has been crucified and you worship the Son. And the situation still somehow got worse because the Avars, their Kagan, sent a diplomatic mission to Constantinople stating that they were willing to talk. And Heraclius accepted the offer to meet with the Kagan, which he did at a town called Herakleios, of no relation, by the way. During these diplomatic meetings, the Avars launched a surprise attack on the emperor himself. And during this attack, Herakleios had to remove his emperor robes and escape back to the capital dressed like a peasant, while the Avars killed everything in their path all the way to the gates of Constantinople itself. Also at this time, the Persian general Sharbaraz, not only did he sack Jerusalem, he also invaded Alexandria and seized it from Nicetas. But with all of these failures and any kind of a lack of reversal, Heraclius actually prepares to depart from Constantinople and rule from Carthage. He did it under the pretext of continuing the war from there. But the Patriarch Sergius intervened with the people of Constantinople, whom he somehow convinced to physically stop the emperor from leaving from the same harbor from whence he came. Now, this was not enough to reverse course, but it did keep Heraclius in Constantinople. With all the pressure Heraclius was under, he really had reached the end of his rope. But Khosrow II quickly learned when you push somebody into a corner, they're eventually going to come out swinging. He sent a letter to Heraclius. One particular line of this letter was, "Do not deceive yourself with vain hope in that Christ, who was not able to save himself from the Jews, who killed him by nailing him to a cross. Even if you take refuge in the depths of the sea, I will stretch out my hand and take you, whether you will or no." This letter seems to be what snapped Heraclius up here. Whatever blue screen of death he was experiencing at that time seems to have just shattered in that moment. He very quickly changes character in the sources. He goes to the Patriarch of Constantinople. Mind you, Sergius was still very angry at him for marrying Martina. Heraclius asked the Patriarch for the church's wealth as a loan because he wanted to finance a new army. He wanted to hit the Persians with everything he had left, in victory or defeat. And the crazy part is, Sergius agreed to do it. He had many church relics melted down, and he replenished the entire Roman treasury, which gave Heraclius the ability to finance a whole new army, to begin a whole new counter-offensive. Now, even by old world standards, the army that Heraclius built was actually rather small. It numbered about 20,000 men, give or take. No exact numbers are ever given, but 20,000 men is roughly the safe assumption to what was at his disposal. While training his new army, it is reported in the Chronicle of Theophanes, he made his army fight each other without bloodshed. Heraclius would actually have his men stand across from each other and have them engage each other. And they trained for months. Heraclius trained himself as a general. When he had fought at Antioch, he had never fought in a battle before. His only military experience was capturing Constantinople itself, which is totally legit, to be fair. Like, let's not diminish that, but it was not a field battle. So after Easter Sunday, in about the year 622, Heraclius decides to lead the campaign himself and marches his army from Constantinople across the mountains and plains of Asia Minor. He had received word that Sharbaraz was moving into the region again, and he decided to take him on. There is no tactic by tactic of the battle that took place, but during the battle, Sharbaraz had hidden an ambush unit in the mountain, and Heraclius was able to get wind of it. So Heraclius ordered that this ambush unit be completely destroyed. And so when the Romans and the Persians met in the field, Heraclius was able to win the battle and force the Persians out of Asia Minor. So Heraclius had scored the first victory against the Persians in about 10 years. Now, at this point, he actually returned to Constantinople and sent yet another diplomatic mission to Khosrow and said, let's stop this now. Let's stop this war. Now, either Khosrow did not respond or he laughed it off. But either way, Heraclius knew that the war was not going to end. So shortly after defeating Sharbaraz, Heraclius returned to Constantinople, and the next season, Heraclius left Constantinople in the hands of a close friend. He left his children under the protection of Sergius, and he marched with his tiny little army of 20,000 men to do really the only thing that he could do with nothing left. With 20,000 men, Heraclius would launch a full invasion of the Persian Empire. I feel that is a good place to end this video. If you have any questions, leave a comment. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say, what you guys think, and see you next time.